Hello and welcome to another episode of the ICC Academy COVID-19 Briefing, an interactive video series where we explore the economic and health implications of this coronavirus pandemic and what must be done to ensure successful recovery for businesses big and small. I'm your host, Thomas Paris, and in this episode, we will discuss how to help banks achieve digitization, a critical goal for the industry. Joining us today is Dave Meynell, Gadi Ruschin, Jacco de Jong, Alexander Goulandris, and our moderator today will be Stephen Beck. As you know, these briefings showcase our collaboration between the ICC and many global partners from the private and public sector. During this session, we'll start by running through a few topics, followed by an audience Q&A session at the end. So we invite you to hold your questions in the chat, send your questions in the chat, but hold them until the end, and we'll go through them together. So let's kick things off. Stephen, over to you.
Thanks, Thomas. Good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Steve Beck, Head of Trade Finance, Trade and Supply Chain Finance at Asian Development Bank, coming to you live from very locked down Manila. If there was ever any doubt about the importance of digitizing trade and supply chains before the crisis, we can all agree there is no doubt at all now. If you would have told me before the lockdown that ADB's trade finance program would do 940 transactions valued at $554 million between 1 April and 15 May, all remotely, without a hitch, I would have been very skeptical. And yet, to my pleasant surprise, that's exactly what's happened, thanks to a great team and some modest degree of digitization we've been able to implement into our business. And I believe that you, the trade finance industry, has had the same pleasant surprise. The industry has been amazingly resilient. And I think before lockdown, very few of us would have predicted just how resilient. Had the crisis have occurred a few years ago, the financial sector would not have been able to support the flow of trade that we are able to support today in lockdown. Knowing how vital digitization is to securing global trade and supply chains for food, medicine, and so much more, we have an obligation to move the digitization of our businesses forward aggressively. And that's what this webinar is all about. I'd like to thank our great panel of speakers for agreeing to talk with us today. We're going to start with David Meynell, who played a leading role in drafting the International Chamber of Commerce's guidance that came out a couple of weeks ago on how banks can manage sort of workarounds to address issues really arising from a lack of digitization, issues around the delivery of documents under letters of credit where we've had courier services not functioning the way they usually do, and so on. So David is the founder of Trade LC Advisory, and prior to that, he was a global head of trade product management for financial institutions at Deutsche Bank, where he had a 30-year career. After David speaks for 10 minutes, he'll be followed by three senior guys from leading companies that digitize trade and supply chain operations for banks and their clients. And they'll each speak for 10 minutes, and we'll end off with a rapid fire Q&A for 15 minutes. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. As Stephen mentioned, in late April, the ICC released a collection of what we would call rapid response measures that had been implemented by many trade finance banks around the world in order to keep trade finance moving despite the pandemic. And I think it was quite a poignant point in the paper that the problem being faced today is rooted in trade's single most persistent vulnerability. No surprise, it's paper. It's really the Achilles heel of trade finance. And the fact is, this disruption was always going to happen. The only question was how and when. As one of the drafters of the paper accurately pointed out, the issue that needed to be addressed was that electronic documents are at a kind of uncomfortable intersection at the moment in between 19th century legislation and unsophisticated 21st century processes and operations. As we all know, trade and trade finance operations require very significant back office operations to process the paper. So it was felt appropriate by the ICC's Digitalisation Working Group to collate data on the measures that were being applied. And this wasn't just done by the ICC, we were also joined by ITFA and by BAF. And this led to the paper that you saw at the end of April. Now, these practices that are recorded are unique in that they target a singular problem of how to keep trade flowing when paper-based transactions are difficult or even impossible due to reduced physical interactions. And it should also be borne in mind that whilst it's only 2-3 weeks since the paper was published, this is a very rapidly changing environment, and these practices are continually being improved. So the paper doesn't actually set out best practices, but it's a practical reference document comprising trusted information about the measures that were put in place. Events have made it quite obvious that not just FIs, but corporates, logistics, etc., will need to re-engineer business processes following the pandemic. And it's strongly believed that governments will be an enabler for this. In fact, absolutely essential to involve the governments. To help combat the practicalities of trade finance during the pandemic, many banks indicated they were taking their own measures to relax internal rules on original documentation. However, this is a pity, only 29% of the respondents reported that their local regulators had actually provided support, and this regulatory support is essential. The pandemic itself, I guess, has highlighted challenges to 5 parts of the trade finance process: deal origination and distribution, negotiable instruments, document transmission, authorized signatures, and shipping. And the specific difficulties that FIs faced in these 5 areas are detailed in the paper, which, if you haven't done so already, I strongly recommend you go to the ICC website and download the paper. Now, these difficulties primarily reflect 3 common hurdles: lack of staff, inability to print, and delays in or inability to deliver documents, all paper-based. And the ad hoc practices that the banks have put in place fall under 4 categories: expanded existing digital channels, electronic documents, electronic signatures, and new business processes and controls. And the papers detailed many of these specific practices. Let me just give you a few that have been stated. There's now a greater usage of email. FIs are now using more third-party platforms. They are incorporating the use of electronic signature solutions into existing processes. We're seeing much more PDF presentation of documents, and we're seeing a waiver of the need for wet ink customer signatures. Banks are using software with the capability of creating electronic signatures, and they're amending agreements to allow for all parties to agree to use electronic documents. We're also seeing authentication of documentary presentation examinations via the use of scanned documents. And one very important one, and it's still too slow, some banks are now adopting EUCP version 2.0 and EURC version 1.0 as operating models. And they're configuring their internal processes for greater use of these rules. And you should strongly consider this option moving forward. This is why these electronic rules are there and why they were introduced last year. But in essence, this highlights 3 trends. The first has seen an evolution in the practices related to electronic signatures. For instance, the signature by attached email was widely used. The second is in the practices related to electronic documents. And this is moving forward most quickly and easily in the geographies where local authorities have issued official guidance. And the third is the rollout of digital solutions. But all of these have perhaps introduced some new risks into the existing trade processes. These fall under 4 categories. No surprise, due diligence, operational, and fraud and security are the first 3. The 4th is formats. You'll understand this if you look at the ICC e-rules. All stakeholders need to be ready to accept electronic formats, and that format needs to be readable by all parties. I mean, one of the key issues, and I've already alluded to this, is that regulatory guidance and advice is critical to the facilitation of digital practices in certain geographies. And some have met this better than others. I'm not going to name which countries have, but some have certainly been better. And a few of those are in Asia. The challenge with electronic documents, such as electronic bills of lading, is whether or not they are legally valid. And this answer requires advice from local authorities and governments. But as of April 2020, as of May 2020, there has still been limited regulatory guidance issued. One question that many people ask is, why weren't these digital measures in place already? Fair question. There are 3 answers: cost, complexity, and networks. It's not for me to go into this now, but all of you, I know, are aware of these issues anyway. So in conclusion, there are lots of lessons, I think, that we've learned from the first, 3 months of this pandemic. It is possible to go digital in a crisis using ad hoc measures. Great news. Official guidance and mitigants are critical in the early stages. Now we know what needs to be done. Cross-industry working groups are needed to make the regulatory changes happen. And the regulatory and government guidance is required in order to update and align laws and legal frameworks, which brings me on to another key issue, which I know many of us in the digitalisation working group are fully aware of and keep pushing, which is adoption of the Inter-Trail model law on electronic transferable records. If governments could do this, it would definitely act as a catalyst. Blending together multiple existing single-party platforms works in the short term, but connecting multiple counterparties through standardised platforms is a more sustainable way forward. And let's not forget that the simplest way to resolve most issues is not even digital. It's a matter of promoting dialogue between the commercial parties as well as between the banks. Now, as a final observation before we pass over to the next speaker, the ICC has a number of tools to help. One in particular is called the ICC Digital Trade Roadmap, which is available on the ICC website, and I do urge you to download it. It will help you work for advocacy reasons with regulators, governments, and your own employers. So that would be my final message. Please look at that document. It will help you immensely. Stephen?
Many thanks. Thanks very much, Dave. So now we're going to be hearing from the executives from the companies that help banks and companies digitize. And Dave, to your point, what's on a lot of people's minds and why they haven't advanced the digitization in their own businesses really does have a lot to do with, as you say, cost, complexity of implementation, and compatibility with existing systems and so on. It seems like a daunting undertaking. So it'll be interesting to hear from our next speakers how that kind of stuff can be managed. Gadi, I'll call on you if your kids or your wife or someone isn't in there.
Yeah, no, we have a completely different way of locking down. Actually, I'm in the office and it was one of the employees. They are not used to me running webinars, but don't worry, we can fire them all, so it's perfectly fine. So first of all, thank you very much for arranging this very interesting event, and I hope that I'll be able to share, at least from our perspective, which means that, of course, we will not go into the traditional sales pitch. I'm sure that every bank will eventually get it directly and not through webinars. I would say, main point that I would like to discuss during today's event is actually to share some more views from the outside of the banking industry, which I would say the major heavy lifting of digitizing trade was usually led by the banks, because buyers, sellers, the maritime shipping industry, they are just less affected from the use of paper. Carriers will just issue it on one side and receive it on the other side, and they don't really care what is happening in between. The buyers and the sellers, they just love complaining about the use of paper, but are not very active in moving forward. However, the COVID-19, with all its challenges, brought also many opportunities. So the great phrase of "don't waste a good crisis" is repeated constantly, I guess, through all webinars as well. But what I wanted actually to show is that today, actually, or at least from our point of view, the heavy lifting of onboarding the network, which, by the way, for banking, because of regulatory barriers such as promoting third-party services, is a real challenge. The carriers, on the other hand, they don't have this problem, and they don't have this issue or constraints. So I'll be happy if, Thomas, you can share the video to show a bit of the activity which is actually led by the carriers, and then I will. Thank you.
Okay.
As coronavirus rampages through the world, and every physical encounter presents an imminent risk, it's time to go digital. Zim takes another step towards giving customers a digital experience. Paperless trade is a new value-added service that enables you to issue, transfer, and validate your electronic bills of lading. As part of our continuous pursuit of innovation, we have collaborated with Wave, a digital courier platform provider that specializes in shipping industry processes. Zim customers can now enjoy the benefits of paperless trade. Stay safe and reduce unnecessary physical encounters. Save up to $50 per bill of lading and cut down on lengthy document verification processes, controlling and delivery costs. Transfer documents in minutes instead of days or weeks. Issuing and transferring documents can be as simple as sending an email now. There's no need to change the trade process. Manage your documents using one user-friendly digital platform. Forward your electronic bills of lading to relevant parties and attach soft copies of other trade documents to your virtual envelope. Prevent fraud and risk of document loss or misplacement. Maintain a sustainable process. Use less paper and minimize your carbon footprints. Shippers and consignees are relieved from registration, subscription, or transaction fees. The ZimWave Paperless Trade Collaboration. It's time to go digital.
Thank you very much. So the reason why I wanted to share this video is because until 3 months ago, myself, our sales team, Jacob, Alex, used to wander around the world and try to convince people that digitization, I mean, it was very easy to explain why paper is inefficient, but why should you do the change now? It's a network tool, and it requires, of course, many participants. Just like any other network, the value grows by having a larger network. So today, and I know that it's not only our activity, which means that, of course, I'm seeing it also, I know that also other service providers are promoting similar activities. So today, instead of us going with our very limited sales force and onboarding your customers, which are the corporates, and of course, there are other service providers, which are the logistic companies. So it's now herds of sales teams between Zim and MSC and other carriers, which are also going onboarding the entire customer base, market by market. Not because, of course, everyone wants to promote digitization, a greener world, but currently they are also suffering. And of course, the best way to get a carrier or to get anyone to join and to start offering a digital service is by showing him that his business is suffering and promoting business continuity. So the majority of our activity these days is, first of all, it's very successful. We are seeing unbelievable amounts of new corporates which are joining the service. If, again, 3 months ago, I would go to a bank and say that we have 1 or 2 customers which are on the network and would like to start presenting documents, today we can come with dozens, almost per day, which means that we are, of course, collecting and onboarding and coming with a very interesting offering to the bank, to the different banks. So it's a completely different environment than it used to be before the current situation. I'm sure that the other speakers will confirm it as well. The banks currently can be much more optimistic, which means that instead of just going and trying to convince everyone and removing a paper in order to make the traditional tools like letters of credit or collections or anything that still requires the bank to take possession of all the goods, it was a very complicated mission because no one else suffered in the same levels as the bank, maybe only the commodity traders, which are using a lot of trading and they're using a lot of paper. These days, everyone is suffering, so the digitization is spread much, much faster. Of course, we invite all the participants here in the webinar to explore the services. The technology already here. Joining and testing is not complicated anymore. It does, in some cases, you don't even need the IT to be involved at all, which means that you can do it completely. You can have an immediate onboarding. And I would say that we are actually, I'm the youngest company here in the room. We are only existing since 2015. Of course, we completed some trials in 2016, but today, just to share some from our internal discussions, the industry have completely changed, and this is let's say the money time of digitization. Again, everyone is suffering lots of challenges, but there are also lots of opportunities. Now, of course, from a banking perspective, or from, to be honest, anyone else, once you go digital, you never go back, which means that the minute you receive your first electronic bill of lading, and you enjoy the experience, and everyone here in the room is ensuring that the experience is as positive as it can get, usually it will be really hard to go back to sending paper documents by courier, which means that also trade finance tools can be improved, and we are actually seeing it. It's not interest anymore. It's an actual promotion of digitization, which is actively happening by all the different involved parties, same as also regulators and everyone else. So I think that I have 2 more minutes. I paid for 10, but I'll be happy to share my spare minutes with the respectful other attendees. So thank you very much.
Many thanks, Gadi. Thanks a lot. Jacco, would you please introduce yourself from Bolero and give us 10 minutes, please?
Okay, 10 minutes. That's going to be a challenge for me, but I'll try, Steve. And thanks, Gadi, maybe for the 2 extra minutes. So what I've done for you is I've prepared a little presentation. It's only a few slides I'll pick up on some of the bullets. Just so you know, for the people who don't know me, I actually, I'm heading up the sales force within Bolero, but I have a strong banking background in operations, account management, sales, training, anything under the sun. So I'll come in from a bit of a pragmatic angle also when I do my presentation here. So just going to the next slide, just 1 minute on Bolero, and I can't see the full slide, but so basically we've been around for over 2 decades. So and actually the name Bolero stands for Bill of Lading Electronic Registry Organization. Not many people know that. We started off as an initiative within SWIFT, and since then we have been, as we always call it, bridging the financial and physical supply domains. So we cover the bank to corporate to bank communication on, for instance, letters of credit instruments, but also we enable the actual utilization by means of e-presentations and the use of electronic documents. Our clients use anything, from open account transactions, but we're also connected to blockchain initiatives. And we are currently rolling out our new technology stack, which is called Galileo. And basically, if you've been around for 20 years, you have to take one point where you say, okay, to ensure we're future-proof and to incorporate all the feedback we've got from the clients, corporates, banks, anybody, over the last 2 decades into a new technology stack. So we make sure that the user experience is, at par, at least with competition. If not, we have gone a bit further as well. So let's talk about, the topic of my small section here. So enabling e-presentations under letters of credit. Just a bit of background information. We've been around for 2 decades, but I just checked the files internally, and we actually supported the first e-presentation on the EUCP over the Bolero network back in December 2010. So that's 10 years ago. So it has been done, it has been around, it is a common practice, as you see in the second bullet, in quite a few areas around the globe. Unfortunately, now it had to take a tragedy like COVID-19 to suddenly create interest with many more parties around the globe. And I mean, not just the banks, but also especially the corporates, to see, okay, we have to move away from paper. And this is probably the accelerator needed for the business to move. What we also will notice, and I'm pretty confident of that because you've seen that also in previous crises, is that, in times of global turmoil, risk will go up. So people will tend to start falling back on things that they know, which are, of course, the letters of credit. So I expect personally, based on my background, to see an increase in letters of credit. Probably, the average value will go down a bit. But you will see a lot more over the next coming months. And of course, to Gadi and to the other speakers as well, what you will see is that e-presentations will go up, and we already see that happening right now, especially in the open account space. We already see it, actually. And we also see the first signs that it's now also picking up under the bank transactions. And I'm sure that is a trend that will continue. And to Gadi's point, once you go digital, you will not go back. I also would like to stress, also to Dave's point in the beginning, that banks have resorted and thankfully guided by ICC to BCP processes, to business continuation processes or procedures, with workarounds to handle copy documents via email or via Violect, the swift way of submitting documents between banks at least, and also between corporates. But that is not the same as having an e-presentation. These are workarounds, temporary workarounds, but to have real e-presentations, you would need to go the EUCP and the EURC route for the collections, and you would have to have real electronic documents instead of just having copies flying around. So it's fine for now. It serves a purpose, but I think it also urges the fact that one needs to look beyond the initial impact of the crisis and prepare for the aftermath and maybe even the second wave coming in. So another thing, and I've been fighting this battle with banks and corporates and carriers for, I would say, the last decade. Adoption of e-presentations and electronic documents still requires a paradigm shift for many. Many, I mean banks, especially banks, and you have to rethink how things have been done in the past. As I said in the beginning, we combine the financial supply chain and the physical supply chain. What I noticed with a lot of bankers and a lot of, and I'm getting gray as well, so, I'm guilty. Many are stuck in their old ways. They think that a letter of credit can only work, if all the documents are original, if all the electronic documents that are presented are, legally accepted all around the globe or can be used all around the globe. The letter of credit is a payment instrument. It is a risk mitigation, and also it can be used to obtain financing, and it is a conditional payment instrument. So as the practitioners know, a letter of credit can be payable against a simple thing as even an invoice. You can make it as simple as you want to. Of course, you would like to have some proof of performance. You would like to have, for instance, a title document passing. So I would say the bare minimum would be, have an invoice and have an electronic bill of lading in it. Also from a physical supply chain, you have to work with your clients to see, okay, which documents do you really need to support transaction? When do you need to? How do you need them? Can they be digital? Does the local port or the customs authority, accept an electronic document? And if they don't, do you have a process in place to cover that? My point here on this slide is that, a part of the paradigm shift is that one has to accept that it's a digital transition phase. The world is not completely digital yet. We have to think about ways and workarounds to make things work. Like, for instance, sometimes you would have to have still a paper bill of lading at the port of discharge because for whatever reason. Fortunately, we see that things are changing rapidly at this moment as well. So think about accepting the way that not everything is perfect yet, but you have to go on the journey to get it done. And unfortunately now with the crisis, or fortunately now with the crisis, there is suddenly a push, even at local level, at ministry, governments, or authorities that are finally opening up to go digital quickly as well. So it works. So let me go to the next one, and this is my last slide. So what are the things to consider? One of the main topics to consider. If you start to work with electronic documents and e-presentations, it requires a solid legal framework and a rule book. It needs to be governed by rules and regulations, so everybody knows what is my role, what is my liability, how do I have to handle something. Why can I use an electronic document around the globe? Why can I present it to a bank? Why will the bank accept it as a presentation under a letter of credit? So regardless, how things are governed in local legislations, for electronic documents to work amongst the parties involved, you need a solid legal framework. Also, the way you transfer these documents. I know there's a search in using emails. How secure are the emails, right? And also, if you send a document over email, can it be tampered with? Can it be, altered? So ideally, when documents go from one party to another party, you want to make sure that it's still the original document. And ideally, of course, that there's also a title registry, which we have, of course, as well. If you work with the letters of credit themselves, the traditional ones actually work perfectly for e-presentations. However, you have to look into the wording of the letter of credit. Some things have to be different when you enable e-presentations. And of course, you have to make sure that the applicable rules are mentioned there. In our case, of course, the EUCP, the 2.0 version. Also, I think, you have to take a holistic view. You have to take one step back and you need to look at the overall transaction, where it comes, to the carrier, to the buyer, to the seller, to the banks involved, and then really look what is needed where at a minimum to make it work. And if it doesn't work fully digital, how can you cope with the certain areas to make sure that it still works there? What I also see from a financing perspective is, if banks, finance, and especially also in letters of credit, they also tend to finance a lot. What we have as well is the EBL pledge functionality, where you can pledge a bill of lading. And, when it's pledged over Bolero, you can be sure you're the only pledgee holder at that moment in time, because they can only be pledged one at the time. So that's why we have a title registry, which covers that pledging functionality as well. And also, two final statements. Corporate clients, they will use multiple carriers, they will use multiple trade lanes, they will use financial institutions. So I think, having the network, having the connections, being able to flexible to move with your clients, and also see, sometimes they will use open account transactions, sometimes they will use a letter of credit, or they will use other instruments, maybe even blockchain instruments. So it's important to be connected. And the last bullet I would like to say, it's not about technology. It's not just about technology. It is about adoption. It's about trust. Does it work? Has it worked before? Can I use it? And it's about the user experience. It needs to be simple. It needs to be easy to use. It needs to be clear, and it needs to have clear advantages to the clients. So I think that's about my 10 minutes, hopefully.
That's really interesting, Jacco. Thanks a lot. I'm going to pick up on some of those really interesting points in the rapid fire Q&A.
Okay.
Alexander, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Alex Goulandris. I'm the CEO, one of the co-founders of EssDocs. I also was a maritime lawyer for many years, qualified in the UK and the US before setting up EssDocs. And most recently, I also wear a couple of ICC hats. I've been a member of the advisory board for about 3 years, and I'm co-chair of the Digitization group for the last year and a half. EssDocs focuses on providing paperless trade and trade finance solutions. For us, we look at that as IT and legal. We've talked a lot about legal today. I'll talk a little bit more about it. But also we talked about change management and project management. Change management is a big element in electronic documents. Understanding how to move and transition to paperless is incredibly important. We service, we will hit 50,000 companies this month, which is a pretty exciting milestone for us. We have 3 prongs of solution. The first is secure electronic title documents. This is our DocX solution for document exchange. So that's electronic bills of lading, electronic warehouse warrants. So this is the solution that banks use for e-presentation under letters of credit or doc collections. But we also recognize that full digitization is difficult, and not everyone can immediately jump to end-to-end digital. So we have a number of solutions that we think of as transition or automation technologies. A number that have been used by banks. DocHub is a solution that aggregates data to draft documents, facilitates online approvals internally within an organization and across supply chains, and can manage all non-title documents and transfer documents and data through the solution. We have a solution set called ADP, which facilitates automation of back-end bank processes. So this uses OCR and supervised machine learning to extract data, and then uses the same AI to automate intra-document checks, doc versus LC checks, compliance checks, sanction screening checks, and the like. We've just launched a replacement to the Swift TSU, which is called CMatch, and we have a solution for corporate to multi-bank messaging, essentially for letter of credit guarantees, standby issuance. And then our third prong is certificates of origin, where we essentially can provide, with the largest certificate of origin provider in the world, with 317 chambers in 20 countries. So we've talked about a number of problems with EBLs. Let's start with reality number 1. Electronic bills of lading are complicated, right? The 3 of us on this phone today represent less than 1% of all bills of lading in the world. And that's despite the fact that none of us are newbies, right? As Gadi said, he's been around for 5 years. EssDocs celebrated our 15th anniversary last week. And Bolero has actually been around for 32 years. So this isn't the simplest problem to solve. But there is a new reality in addition to that, which is that the world has changed. Prior to this pandemic, EssDocs, or our certificate of origin platform, EssCert, would sign up an average of 10 chambers per year, 10 chambers per year, and 1 new country every 2 years. What we've seen in the last few months is we've signed up 54 chambers in just 4 months. So obviously a massive jump, 11 times the normal. We've signed up 5 new countries, 25 times the norm. And I think probably one of the themes that's come out of today is that paperless trading has essentially moved from a nice to have to a must have solution that allows trade to continue. Dave's mentioned a couple of problems. Steve's mentioned a couple of problems. Let's look at what we think are probably the 4 largest problems. Rules, you need E-enabled ICC rules, legal validity. The international treaties that deal with paper bills of lading do not allow for electronic, or most of them are what the US versions from the 1920s. The rest of the world is typically based on a treaty from the 1970s. Obviously, they weren't forward-thinking enough to allow for electronic. So the international treaties dealing with transfer of title basically don't deal with electronic. Equally, local laws don't yet deal with electronic. This was the model law on electronic transferable records that Dave mentioned. That is a model law to change that. Currently, I think that law has only been enacted in Bahrain. So we've got a little bit of way to go for that to really become a major thing, but Singapore's working hard on it, and a number of other countries are too. So how do you solve that? You have a legal framework, and all the 3 of us have an IG, P&I club approved legal framework, which is the minimum starting point. The next starting point from a bank's perspective is you need to ensure that an authorized signatory has signed off on that legal agreement. Because if the person who signed up to the legal agreement wasn't authorized to bind the company, your bill of lading will not be valid, and thus your security will not be valid. So pretty important thing to consider. We've talked about the network. Bills of lading are like a fax machine. If you're the only company in the world with a fax machine, it's not very useful. So you need the network. Whether that's counterparty corporates, counterparty banks, you need that network. Another issue that we've come across a lot is customs. In a lot of countries, customs demand paper originals. In fact, sometimes customs brokers demand paper originals. So it's important to understand what will customs accept. If you're dealing with electronic bills of lading and you go into a country and you cannot provide paper to clear customs, you have a problem. You facilitated the trade transaction from a financial perspective, but obviously not from a physical perspective. Now, all these problems can and have been solved. Dave mentioned that the ICC released EUCP 2.0 and EURC last year. So that was a big step forwards in e-enabling the rule sets. That was the first version of an electronic version of the doc collection rules, for example. Legal validity, as we mentioned, we all have an IG approved legal agreement. But one of the other things that we focus a lot on is ensuring by our in-house legal team that the agreement is validly executed, i.e. executed by someone with authority to bind that organization or group. From a network perspective, we tend to focus on a suite of solutions to allow banks and corporates to digitize at their own pace. And that seems to be pretty successful for us because we've built a pretty large network from it. We also work with a lot of partners, and that is a big part of our approach over the last 2 years. There's an open API that allows third-party platforms to integrate our EBL solution directly into Contour, which is a bank letter of credit solution set that came out of Voltron, MindHub, who's a trade execution platform that's digitizing the metals and minerals business, VAT, that's led by 7 of the largest oil companies in the world, doing the same for energy. Gateway is a consortium of energy companies and Chinese banks. So by partnering with other people, we expand the network. On the customs side, we have EBLs already being used in 70 countries, and we're either in trials or talking to customs about outputs that they will accept for another 11. So again, we found workarounds for every one of these problems in terms of building the network, building custom solutions, ensuring the legal validity, and so forth. But so what does it take to get started as a bank? Well, banks are complicated. You have a lot of internal processes. We have a lot of experience of onboarding banks, either at a country level or at a global level. Once you have gone through the various steps, we can actually get you live in a very short time. So the first branch we can get live within a week, and after that we can add new branches within a couple of days. So what are the technical requirements? Essentially, you need internet access. There's no hardware or software to download with our solution. From a setup and onboarding perspective, we'll give you handbooks that will help you as a bank understand everything you could possibly want to know about EBLs, plus the same for your exporter corporates, plus the same for your importer corporates. So we're going to provide you with all the information you could possibly need. We'll also assist you with all the change management and internal sign-offs, be that security, be that legal, be that process approval. We'll support you through training and through go live with one team, and then we'll continue to support you 24/7, 365 on an ongoing basis. So essentially, we have offices all over the globe to help you with that. So essentially, we look at transitioning to electronic documents as a project, as Jacco said. This is not a single, I download a piece of software and I'm done forever. And we'll support you through that adoption cycle because it's critically important that this becomes a seamless experience for you and for your corporates. And that's all I had. I think I overran. Sorry about that.
No, that's perfect, Alex. Thank you very much. And you've already answered a lot of my questions. That was really very helpful. And one thing that's come through, I think, from all of the speakers is that we mustn't wait. The world hasn't gone digital yet, and so there are issues with banks and their clients going digital. But we can't wait. We need governments, and for anyone who's listening that's on the sovereign side of life, governments to adopt the model laws from UNCITRAL on digitization. We need global adoption of the legal entity identifier that we all know about. And of course, we're all collaborating to create digital standards in trade, which is an initiative that's going to be up and running in the second quarter. But we mustn't wait. Do you want to sort of rapid fire? You want to talk about some of the workarounds? I mean, you've already mentioned a couple of them, but is there anything else you guys want to add to that quickly before I get into some other detail?
Can I maybe mention something, Steve? So,
please.
So what we noticed from a Bolero perspective, and I'm sure the same must be true for Wave and for EssDocs as well, is that we see, especially in the month of March of this year, which when sort of COVID really hit business, we see a huge increase of the issuance of EBLs. However, what we don't see yet is a big spike on the e-presentation side. So that basically tells me a few things, is that the corporates are already switching for the open account transactions to start using EBLs more, which also makes sense because of course it's easier in an open account setup, to switch more quickly than it is for, amending LCs or issuing new letters of credit subject to EUCP and making sure that the whole ecosystem is up and running, including the banks. But you can already see that there's a shift happening right now in the open account space. So I think from a banking perspective, and that's the angle for today, we should still remember, and I also mentioned it in the ICC groups where I'm also a member of, is we have to think that global trade, 80%, and in some countries like India, it's even 86%, is still done on open account. So the shifts we see happening in open account will also eventually hit, the traditional trade. So I think that's another plus to prepare, to your point, Steve, and wait no longer to make sure that the banking environment is also preparing for the shift to digital.
Yes.
Yeah, Steve. So we've seen something similar. We've got a mining company who decided to use electronic documents as their business continuity plan. So they went to 31 steel mills in China that we didn't already have on our network. Of which 21 have now signed up, 5 are in the process of reviewing our legal agreement, and 6 we haven't yet been introduced to. But those 21 have been signed up and onboarded within a few weeks. But some of them can't transact because there's some banks missing or some branches missing. And one of the issues from working from home for people is it's already a workaround to people's normal processes, and now changing and accepting electronic documents at the same time is definitely going to be a challenge for the banks. And I think ultimately, a lot of us here have a lot of experience, and we can help you through that process.
Yes. From my end, I will actually, I'll be happy to actually mention that one of the main, I would say, issues that the banks used to, as I mentioned, they used to take all the heavy lifting, which means that the bank will have to ensure that, for example, the bill of lading can be released at the customer, the destination. In paper, they are not checking it. So I would say that the major change by having the corporates and the carriers that are now promoting the service from their end, that it's not the problem of the banks anymore. And when you are looking at trade from the eyes of a carrier or a corporate, they don't let the facts confuse them, let's say like that, which means that we've had, of course, when you have a letter of credit, everything will be by the book based on the requirements of the letter of credit. But in an open account, and as mentioned, many will move to electronic originals instead of way bills, because this reduces the risk even without banking being involved. So in many cases, we have electronic documents even going to Brazil, for example, which is a very complicated market. And the carriers will help the corporate to solve it and to ensure that it can be released at the destination. Same thing goes to other, let's say, more complicated markets. At this point, going digital will actually mean for a bank that he's just digitizing his own business from his own egoistic principles, I would say, or his own egoistic interest, while the problems of customs, the problem with Chamber of Commerce, the problem with everything else will be just dealt with the other, using the other participants. Now it's not just the banks and ICC who are promoting it. Now it's practically everyone. So it's not just the creation of the network, it's also the finding solutions for everything else. We've had all types of workarounds. It's even impossible to give examples because every scenario existed between the electronic presentation of just scanned documents, not the bill of lading, of course, but others, because some certificate authority in, I don't know, somewhere in the world just they don't have internet. So all the problems are being solved. And it's not just by the banks.
Yeah, I think there is a recognized imperative obligation at each and every component part of the trade ecosystem, companies, ports, customs, banks, importers, logistics. Everyone needs to get with it. It's just this is too serious not to. We're putting too much in jeopardy. So if I'm a bank, I'm thinking about moving forward. I mean, just the implementation, Alex, you made it sound pretty easy, but I mean, is it really that easy? The implementation into my bank with integrating with my systems and then having to onboard all of my clients. It sounds like a nightmare. But it's not. Question?
No, I think those are two questions. There's three parts to a bank moving to electronic documents. One is the internal sign-offs. Those are going to be change management. They're going to be security. They're going to be legal. That is not quick. The fastest we see in a bank do those is a couple of months. On average, it takes a bank a year. Actually adopting the solution, because for us, there's no software to adopt. We can set you up and train you within 2 days. So actual use of electronic documents going live is easy. Building up the network also takes time. Although, again, that's not only the responsibility of the bank. We work with the bank. We have an entire team whose job is to help the bank build up the network, help the bank's corporates build up their network. So essentially, that is a sort of partnership approach, I guess, in digitizing the network.
Thanks. Just very briefly, if you want to mention anything, Jacco?
Yes, I totally agree. It's the internal decision-making process in banks with all these various stakeholders is really what's the most time-consuming. Getting them up and running, trained, signed up, using the system which can be used as a standalone. That's not the part that takes time.
Yes. Also from our end, the technology is never the problem. The sign-offs, this is one of the main reasons why the customer demand is very important. We will never approach a bank unless we have very concrete demand from its own customer. Now, of course, the customer will usually use multiple banks, but they will select one that they want to partner with in the beginning. Now, it's not a matter of it's just adapting to the new future. We definitely see it. Everyone here on the line or on the webinar can see it. And from the technology perspective, I'm sure that every service provider can provide you either a complete standalone on a cloud or local installation. Everyone is very flexible. The technology is never the problem. It's the actually believing that the business will be digitized. And now we can see that it is happening, and the fastest to adapt. It's
and maybe
advantage in many cases.
Yeah, and Gadi, maybe further to your point as well, is like what you see with the other digitization projects where banks are involved. Those are usually proof of concepts and trying out new ways to see if there's client demand. Where we tap into with our solutions, we tap into business as usual. Things that the banks have been doing for hundreds of years sometimes, and then suddenly you bring in a new element of digitization, and then as some people just start to this is new, this is scary. I've been doing things the same way for decades in my current position. How do I change? How do I adopt? So that's also another challenge that we face, from a business as usual perspective.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, I do enjoy that it moved to a panel, and so another very interesting point that we are seeing is that when banks approach a corporate, they will contact the financial department, which in many cases, they don't even see the paper, so they don't suffer from it. So it's much harder for a bank, putting aside the regulatory barrier or the regulatory constraint, I don't know, the policy not to promote a third-party service. when a bank is contacting a corporate, it will go to the financial department, which in many cases are not even seeing the bills of lading, so they definitely are not suffering from it. Now, they care about a completely different set of issues, which is what is the cost of the financing, which means that they have different problems. When a carrier goes to a corporate, he goes directly to the person who is handling the paper, and that was faced a loss of bill of lading. So it's also, which means that everything has changed. And I personally, which means that I believe that the main thing that we get the industry to be digitized, and the fastest bank to adapt will actually enjoy it, is the absolute decentralization of the requirements. Of course, I'm pushing the word decentralized whenever I can. When you decentralize the effort from the banking to everyone else, it's a completely different way of onboarding, and we are all seeing it.
Could you guys talk, thank you for that. Could you guys talk just very quickly to cost? How does that work? Is it astronomical? Is it, could you give the viewers just sort of a sense for that, please? Because I'm sure that's daunting for a lot of people who may be nervous to ask.
The more, the better.
What, the more cost, the better?
Of course. I mean, we take it.
Yeah. So basically, from a Bolero perspective, we have a very simple module. It's an annual subscription, and it's a cost per transaction, and there's no one price or setup suits all. It depends on the market. It depends on the counterparties. It depends on the countries. But usually that's a very easy model from our perspective.
Yeah, we have tranched transactions with discounts for countries in emerging markets.
Thank you.
We actually charge the carriers, not so much the banks at this point. It's a slightly different project. I would say product. So we charge the issuer or the originator of the document. So if a bank issues a guarantee, he will pay, but for bills of lading, he is not actually required to pay.
Thank you. Quickly on compliance, anti-money laundering and so on. I see some sort of questions coming up. Could you just speak very briefly to the role that the digitization of documents plays in compliance and operational risk, please? Jacco?
Shall I start? Okay, so of course compliance is becoming an ever-increasing nightmare for the banks, right? It's the cost of running compliance departments and making sure that you can screen everything. The moment that you are moving towards digitization, and for instance you are able to have your documents electronically available, that already reduces the risks of goods documents getting lost or fraud being committed, like people changing things in documents that you don't really want them to change. But also, having access to digital documents can make compliance screening much easier, either through your existing tools or tools, that I'm sure all of us can, partner up and provide to you. Often, sometimes the banks do still want to stick to their existing compliance systems, but it's one thing, if you have to, for instance, scan paper documents, and then use that data to do an automated compliance check. If you have native electronic documents, of course, the quality of the data is much better.
Yes.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for participating in this panel. I think it's been really helpful. I've learned a lot. And if the viewers, the listeners want to contact any of the companies, I'm sure you can find them very easily through the links that we've provided on the webinar. But if not, for some reason, just come into contact with us, and we'll direct you accordingly. As we've discussed, this is a really critical issue on a historic kind of level. I don't think that's an overstatement, to ensure the safety of global trade and supply chains and getting people their food and medicine and so on and so forth. So whatever it takes, let's move forward. We'll be planning on doing some of these webinars, I think, with some regularity, maybe once a month. So please stay tuned. We'll and if you have any ideas for topics, please feel free to share them. Thank you so much again, and thanks to ICC Academy for facilitating.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Steve.
Thank you all for your
Connor.
time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone else.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So as a reminder, we are hosting live broadcasts on this topic in addition to other trade topics like the Incoterms rules, cryptocurrency, leadership coaching, and many others. So sign up on our website for free and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the COVID-19 Briefing. See you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Well done, Thomas.
Thank you. See you next time. Bye,
I'm
guys.
going to radio or television. Thanks.
Thanks, Captain Ahab.
Yeah,
Love the beard,
exactly.
Go forth. You're free.
And digitize.
Cross the desert and digitize, and everyone will leave you alone.
Cheers, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye, guys.
Stay safe.
Steve, thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye, guys.
Stay safe.
Thanks a
Bye-bye.
lot,
Have a
guys.
great, guys.
It was good. Really, it was good. Thank you.